Go for it, Bobby.
All set, Dan?
Yes.
Time being 6 o'clock, I call the March 18, 2026, 6 p.m. meeting, Town Council meeting to order. Chair Griffin is going to be calling his meeting, school committee. This is a joint meeting.
Time being 6:01, I call the school committee meeting to order.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, a note to residents, all citizens are welcome to attend public meetings in person. To view the live meetings remotely, citizens are encouraged to watch the live stream on the Franklin Town Hall TV YouTube channel, on the live broadcast on Comcast Channel 9 and Verizon Channel 29. To listen to the meeting remotely, citizens may call in using the number 1-929-205-6099. To participate in the meeting remotely, citizens may join a Zoom webinar using the information provided below. Meetings are recorded and archived in Franklin TV on the Franklin Town Hall TV YouTube channel. It's shown repeatedly on Comcast Channel 9 and Verizon 29. The Zoom webinar details. ID number is 894-4938-1756. Any participants who wish to speak during the webinar must enter their full name and email address when joining the webinar. All participants will be automatically muted upon joining the webinar. In order to speak, participants will need to select the raise hand function to request to be unmuted. All speakers will be required to state their full name and street address before commenting. Announcements from the chair. This meeting is being recorded by Franklin TV and shown on Comcast Channel 9 and Verizon Channel 29. This meeting may be recorded by others. The chair identifies that Councilor Blank is on vacation, will not be attending unless he zooms in. I don't know if he zoomed in. He said he might, but I'm not sure if he's done.
I don't see him.
Yeah, he said he didn't think he was. He was gonna try. Upcoming town-sponsored community events. Tomorrow, on March 18th, the Town Council office hours will be held at the Franklin Senior Center at 8:30 a.m. Committee assignments, I'm going to list them. So there'll be a handout to all the councilors. The joint budget subcommittee is Ken Zuku, Jean Grella, Ted Comey Ledger, and Steve Malloy, with Ken being the chair and Jean Grella being the vice chair. Communication subcommittee, Carol Griffin, Jane Calloway Tripp, Max Morangello, Jean Grella, with Carol Griffin being the chair and Jane Calloway Tripp being the vice chair. Economic Development Subcommittee, Mike LeBlanc, Max Morangello, Carolyn Griffin, and Steve Malloy, with Mike LeBlanc being the chair and Max Morangello being the vice chair. Town Charter Review Subcommittee will be myself, Ted Comey Ledger, and Mike LeBlanc, with myself chairing it and Ted Comey Ledger being the vice chair. So a note, especially to new councilors, a reminder to all town councilors that their attendance at the subcommittee meetings results in a quorum of the town councils. Non-subcommittee members cannot speak unless the town council meeting has been separately posted, because that would be a violation of the open meeting law. So it basically means that we can't really speak, but everything comes back here anyway, so that's the time that we can speak. Yeah, I will go right now. So, can we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Citizens' comments. Citizens are welcome to express their views for up to 3 minutes on a matter that is not on the agenda. In compliance with the Chapter 38, Section 20, the open meeting law, the council cannot engage in a dialogue or comment on a matter raised during citizens' comments. The council may ask the town administrator to review the matter. Nothing herein shall prevent the town administrator from correcting a misstatement of fact. Is there anybody in the council chamber? Steve, just your name and address, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve Sherlock, United Media Drive, Community Information Director, Franklin Avenue, Franklin Public Radio. Just a couple quick announcements, public service announcements. On March 28th, at the Black Box, the food pantry is benefiting from the Party for the Pantry, which is put together by a group of folks. I had the opportunity to interview them. That broadcast is on the radio at 8, 1, and 6 on Friday this week. The podcast is also available on Franklin Avenue, Franklin News. The second piece for your April calendar, April is National Poetry Month. Saturday, April 18th at 1:30, there'll be a favorite poem reading at the library. Additional information will come out. There'll be a sign-up sheet online, so if you have a favorite poem that you'd like to read to the community, you can do so on Saturday, April 18th. You'll also get an individual invite. It's just for the library. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Is there anybody else in council chamber? Wow, you have a lot more than that. School committee must have scared them away. Anybody on Zoom?
Yep. Rachel Lucas, just give her 1 second to unmute. I just added her for. Rachel, you there?
Hi, everybody. Rachel Lucas, 37 Ridge Road. I also serve as the chair of the Franklin Democratic Council. And I'm sharing tonight that the annual caucus to elect delegates for the convention for the Democratic Party occurred. And for the second year in a row, Franklin filled our slate of 17 delegates. So we will be represented by the state this summer at the end of May. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Anybody else?
Nope.
All right. Oh, this is the new twist. We have council comments. Councilor Malloy.
Thanks, sir. I'll be quiet tonight. No comments for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also don't know a lot other than saying I am looking forward to us embarking on figuring out how to develop the strategic plan as a council, FinCom, and to appreciate whatever it is.
I have no comments.
Max. Thank you, Mr. Chair. E pluribus unum, out of many one. We stand here tonight, a body of different voices and different viewpoints, but tonight is special. We begin the process of coming together and crafting a unified strategy to move this town forward. And not only that, tonight we have unite two bodies that have long operated on parallel tracks and invite them to finally run on the same, the town council and the school committee. Tonight we stand together, united under one banner, the banner of Ben Franklin, who famously said, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." Benjamin Franklin. Now this process is just beginning. It will not be easy. There will continue to be plenty of disagreement and constructive debate. But let me make one thing perfectly clear. Tonight, the Town Council and School Committee stand side by side, ready to take on the challenges facing our community. And together, we will fight for a better tomorrow. A tomorrow where our schools have adequate teaching supplies, our seniors have the support they need, and our police and fire departments have the resources to keep us safe. A future where the library has hours on Sunday, and our children don't have exorbitant extracurricular fees, and our roads won't decay into oblivion. But that tomorrow will not come unless we act today. It will not happen unless we join hands. It will not happen without E pluribus unum. out of many, one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Max. Jane?
I actually, excuse me, only have one thing. I received an email regarding, for Bellingham, regarding a battery storage facility they're trying to put. And I did reach out to the people who sent the email just to get a little bit more information. And I'm gonna try to attend their April 2nd council meeting in Bellingham also to find out what's going on. But I was just curious if you knew anything about this, and is it anywhere on Franklin property, or how this will affect us? Because in the body of the email, it says that where they're looking to do it is right next to the Charles River, and there's a clear sign that says fragile, I lost my place, fragile environment right there. And I'm feeling that a battery storage with a ton of lithium batteries right next to the Charles River and fragile land is probably not the smartest thing to do. And I'm wondering if you should have any say in this.
So, through Chairman, I don't know a ton of the specifics. I do know the town of Bellingham, I believe, owns the land and they're sponsoring the battery storage facility. I don't know what parcels, like I don't know geographically if there's industrial properties or other residential properties near it. I don't believe there is, but
According to the letter, it's abutted by residential.
Right. But I don't believe that Franklin, you're gonna have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe Franklin has any available opportunity to get parcels completely within Bellingham's community, so I don't know if we really have much of a say in anything going on there.
Even if it could affect our conservation and the Charles River and the water and all that stuff.
So the Charles River, so the Mine Brook back there and the wetlands, all of that is Army Corps of Engineer floodplain. So the town of Franklin doesn't own a lot of any of that land in there. There may be, I have to look at the map, because there's a lot of splintered up pieces of land over there. I don't believe the town has any stake in it. I'm going to try to email the town administrator over there to try to get some clarity and some facts on it. So I understand the bigger picture, but obviously I think what I was going to say in my remarks too, but their 35-year long-time administrator just passed away yesterday as well, so I'm just going to give them a few days before I start on battery storage and stuff. But I'll get some more information on it. We'll get some more information from town and we'll report back. I'll try to do the best I can to send stuff out of the council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, welcome school committee members to tonight's meeting. We're excited to have you guys here. And welcome to our special guests from DESE. I'd like to say I'm excited to hear what you have to say, but that's only if you promise us some money. Of course, I'm kidding. And I don't know why Councilor Blank gets the exception. He doesn't have to follow Twice. Claimed he wanted to get sleep and enjoy vacation. I don't know. Of course, we'll have a great time. And just a reminder, if you haven't already bought your tickets for this weekend's finale showing of Into the Woods at the Black Box, they are selling fast. I'm excited to go on Saturday night with the group and geek out on some fun times. That's all I have tonight, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say that I'm also excited about working with the school committee and working with them as a joint team to basically help solve a lot of the problems that we have in the town, especially with some of the structural issues that we have. So definitely, I just echo, I think, what Max said. And that's all I have.
Thank you. And I would like to also say I'm happy to see you guys here, happy to see, Jamie and Lucas working together, get this all together so we can start working on this problem. We all know it's a big problem, so more hands, hard work, hopefully we get things done. I'd like to say my condolences to the long time president of Dean College, Mrs. Rooney. She passed away yesterday after only a couple of years of retirement, I believe, right? 3 years of retirement. So unfortunately, that's what happens. And when somebody's coming up on retirement, he doesn't like to hear that stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna. But, so our condolences goes to Dean Colleges, the room. And that's about it. So, subcommittee meetings, obviously we have none. We just made them, so, Jamie, I think it's up to you now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, as I mentioned a minute ago, I do have a few items. One, incredible condolences to the Bellingham community for their loss of Dennis Frayne, their town administrator for 35 years. Dennis was also a local guy from Bellingham, so I know the community is reeling, and as I've offered to them, if there's anything they need, the town of Frank, we're there for them. We have a lot of relationships with Bellingham on a lot of fronts, and they're great friends, and I'm very sad for their loss. Dennis was a wonderful man to all of us. We've been here for a while, so we wish them the best in the rest of the season. And also, you know, to the Dean College community, obviously, for what I just learned a few hours ago was the passing of Dr. Rooney. She certainly built the Dean difference, the Dean brand into a powerhouse school. They've done a great job, and we're very sad for their community and their family as well. So rest in peace, Paula. I do want to acknowledge Representative Roy is on the Zoom call tonight. He did include the lawmakers and the state agency here tonight. And I do want to recognize Roy and thank him for attending online. Couple budget points. March 27th, next week. By town charter, I'll be officially filing the town administrator's budget. It will look exactly the same as what has been presented already. And then the Finance Committee hearings this year will be from April 6th to April 9th, which is only a few weeks away. For those interested in the budget, I would hope those are must-see TV. And I think what you're going to see this year, just as a little bit of a precursor, we obviously all know that we're not going to be able to really talk full numbers on the budget until healthcare comes in after open enrollment. We'll be very transparent and clear about that. All budget season is not going to change. Open enrollment starts on April 1st with GIC, ends on April 30th. We won't really have budget numbers probably closer to Memorial Day. So as a result, I think with the Finance Committee hearings, and probably even some of the town council time when you have your budget hearings, we'll focus on obviously any public input that's there, but also I hope the committees use this time valuably to go through every line item in both the town budget as well as the school department budget. And take some time to look into everything and answer any questions that people may have on staffing, expenses, trends. This is a real good opportunity. So I believe April 6th is general government. I believe the Tuesday the 7th is for public education, which also includes tri-training and the Aggie. And then April 8th is going to be public safety and public works. And then April 9th, if we're still here and awake, then they'll look at maybe encapsulating some further discussion. Because we're not going to know healthcare numbers until later towards Memorial Day, the Finance Committee has a meeting on May 28th and June 3rd. So the Finance Committee, I would imagine, might likely make a more formal recommendation on the budget after we know what the healthcare numbers are and what the consequences or benefits from those healthcare numbers are. And then finally, in between there, April 16th is a joint budget subcommittee. So we've been able to get that on the books. And so, boy, if you're not out-budgeted by now, you've got a lot of time coming up to get questions answered and asked from all the departments. So I'm looking forward to finally getting going. It's great for spring season. I do want to give a huge shout out to Marina Zelaya, the Director of Community Planning and Development. We were awarded this week a $250,000 grant from DEP to help clean up the New Style site. So if people don't know the New Style site, I'm not going to go into it right now, but I know Councilor Cormier Ledger and certainly Councilor Lorco is familiar with the site. But it's a polluted town-owned site off of Grove Street. And I'm proud to say through Congressman Oppenploss getting us $500,000, we used some federal ARPA money, and now with this grant, you got about $1 million trying to take down the old buildings and do some of the site cleanup. Once that property is cleaned up in hopefully several years, it'll be a huge town asset. Because it'll be a valuable piece of property right off of 140. It's zoned industrial and business, so in terms of tax base and growth at some point, this is a parcel of land we will be able to sell and be able to get some revenue back from it after all the people. So thank you very much to Marina for her hard work already. $250,000 grant is already double her salary, so she's already made twice the amount of money for her salary. So I think when we talk grants, here's a good return on investment already there. The one catch is during capital, I'm going to need you guys to vote in $30,000 in matching money, but I think $30,000 to get $250,000 for the site is really an expenditure worth moving forward. Restaurant Week is already kicked off. Apparently it was a very popular idea. The staff are super pumped up about it, and they told me already that they're looking to scope out a Restaurant Week right after Memorial Day. So we're looking at Sunday, May 31st to June 6th, and Julie and Liz and our planning staff are working on that. They're trying to coordinate it around Porch Fest. It sounds like a great choice of time. So hopefully we can get all the restaurants and licensees in town to do some special deals, get people out. And in that last month of meals tax collection, let's go outside into Franklin restaurants and eat hearty, eat a lot. There's a lot of great places that are showing up, so it shouldn't be too hard for folks to do. And then the last couple points, one, I've highlighted this before at meetings, but it's perking up again. The Planning and Conservation Departments just want to make sure the community is aware of continual fraudulent emails and phishing scams that are impersonating town departments. And they're sending invoices to people who are applicants at those boards and trying to bait them into clicking on a link and paying bills. I want to make sure this is also clear that police have been doing a ton of outreach on this for the last year and a half. This is not unique to Franklin. This is something that's going on at the town level in a lot of planning and conservation departments. And while I've got Rep. Roy, who's listening intently online, I would note one of the issues here is actually because all of the records are public for all of the applications that go before these boards, it's actually kind of fresh meat for a phishing scam artist to be able to go in, use AI to basically document our letterhead, make it look like our staff, make it look like Marina or Bricolai or Gus or somebody is sending them a bill for a low amount of money, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. It's a perfect target, and I hate to break the news, but there have been people who have paid these bills in other communities. I have yet to hear of one here. We've had certainly a few close calls. There might have been one or two, I'm sure, out there, but there's been a lot of close calls. We've gotten a lot of concerns from residents. So if you're a resident out there or you're an applicant before the Planning Board, Conservation Commission, or Zoning Board of Appeals, and you get a bill in your inbox, please call the office, send us an email, double check that that is an actual real bill, because we're finding out that there's a lot of these scams that are out there. So just wanted to make sure that's out there. And last but by no means least, Liz is somewhere in the audience. Here we go. So I just wanted to introduce Liz Galatian. So Liz is now part of our office. She's our Director of Communications and Civic Engagement. And I just wanted her to introduce herself to everybody. I know she met a few of you before the meeting, but just to do a quick intro, we're super excited to have her here. And she is already working on getting education outreach out there on phishing scams.
I did. I just
Welcome to town government.
Thank you. I just posted actually on Facebook, our Facebook page. But I just want to say it's nice to meet all of you. I look forward to working with you and identifying the different goals you have for communications and to work in communication strategy. And I look forward to strengthening the communications throughout the town and community engagement as well. So thanks to you all. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Liz. And one of the other bits that folks may not know, Liz jumped on one of our emergency management calls during snowstorms. The first phase was 2 snowstorms. And funny enough, the superintendent was on our calls. And Liz already has some experience with Franklin because she worked for a John Guilfoyle PR firm who the superintendent hired, and so there's already a familiar relationship. She's already done some press articles, I think, for the schools, and so I've already offered to make sure that Lucas that if Liz can ever be of help, she's right through the door, and so if there's anything we can do to help the school department, Liz is available for those services. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, moving on. We have no proclamation. We can sign one for the oldest Boston cane. So, but Nancy will present that, right?
Yep.
So obviously she can't come. Do we know how old she is? 103. God bless us. God bless us. So her name is Naomi Beard. Yeah. So Nancy, town clerk, would bring this to her and I'll set her. She's the oldest Franklin resident. And she's staying around for a while. All right, moving on, approval of minutes. You have an approval of the motion for January 21st, 2026. This was tabled February 11th, 2026. The town council meeting did this. We know that was all taken care of, Jane? Was it Jane?
Yes and no. We added the link to the actual video because I could not access the YouTube transcript to be able to try and pull out the questions. And I'll be honest, I didn't have 5 hours to rewatch that meeting and then try to write them all down. So, to get them approved for now, I did speak with Julie and I said, why don't we just add the link to the video for now? Because at least that reference where everything was done and if someone wants to go watch it, they can and see where the questions and stuff were asked and all that kind of stuff.
So you're set?
For now, yeah. If it was like a 2-hour meeting, I would have watched it, so 5 hours was like a little bit more than I could bring from.
So, all right, so I'll entertain a motion at this point for the minutes of January 21st, 2026.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. It's approved. All right, again, we will go with approval of minutes of February 4th, 2026. Second. Any discussion? Deletions? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Approval of minutes for March 4th, 2026. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved. I have some discussion on this one. I noticed that under Councilman Malloy's comments from the March 4th meeting, you talked about Chloe Bowser from FHS, and that name, her name was omitted in the minutes. I just wanted to make sure that her name would actually be included in the minutes, that she could be properly recognized.
Any problem with that?
No.
So do we have to do an amendment to that?
You just make the motion to approve the minutes as advised.
So I'll entertain a motion for the minutes. March.
So moved.
2026. As amended. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Appointments, we have one. Finance Committee, Tom Sullivan. Clerk will read the appointment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an appointment to the Finance Committee for Thomas Sullivan of 7 Town Line Road here in Franklin. The Town Administrator has appointed Mr. Sullivan to serve on Franklin's Finance Committee with a term to expire on June 30th, 2026. The motion to ratify the appointment by the Town Administrator of Mr. Sullivan to serve as a member of Franklin's Finance Committee with a term to expire on June 30th, 2026.
I have a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Do we have Tom here?
I'm Tom Sullivan.
All right.
My background,
I tested We have your address, so we know where you live.
All right. My background, I spent my life in healthcare. Most of my career was a chief financial officer in hospitals. I retired as a chief executive officer of a hospital system up in Gardner area, and currently retired with a small little consulting.
So you don't want to retire. That's a good thing.
I want to be active.
Okay. Well, thanks for stepping up, Tom. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
I just have one thing. Well, first off, thank you, Tom, for stepping up to the plate. I just wanted to ask the town administrator, in the previous meeting, we talked about having the language of the appointments, making clear that the town council is the appointing authority, not the town administrator. I just want the language different, just to make it clear for our records. So in the future, I just want that delineation clear. Is that okay?
Absolutely, you can amend that to say the town council is appointed. Thomas, I'll just make a quick amendment. Next, correct.
I'm fine with it how it is now, but just next time.
Well, next time we'll do it. We'll move on from there. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Welcome aboard, Tom. We have no public hearing, no license transactions. We do have presentations. Is your other, is he here?
They're right over there. That's it?
Yes. Everybody's. No, but I thought he was going to come. So we made it perfect, 6:30, Paul. All right, so Jamie, you want to start us off?
Sure, I just really quickly, we'll turn it over to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I want to thank mostly Jonna and the superintendent. I think there was been a desire to have DESE come in and do an overview of Chapter 70 and the entire formula, and I really thank Jonna for kind of making this a larger community conversation as opposed to just a school committee one. So thank you to her and the superintendent for their willingness to do this, and thank you to the school committee for coming to the council meeting to have a broader discussion on Chapter 70. So I don't have anything else unless you guys have anything you want to add, Lucas or anyone else. But otherwise, I think Rob, Meg, you're up.
Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Rob O'Donnell. I'm the Director of School Finance at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I'll let Megan introduce herself.
And I'm Megan Ryan. I'm the State Age Programs Manager at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
So, yeah, thanks for having us. We want to thank the school district, Jonna, Malati, and the superintendent for having us out, as well as the council and the school committee for giving us time this evening. So what our plan is for this evening is to give you kind of a brief overview, as brief as it can be, of the Chapter 70 formula. We'll kind of call it Chapter 70 101, and we'll take your questions as we go. Perfectly happy to do that, and then we can leave time for questions at the end. We'll focus particularly on Franklin. Obviously, some of our slides will focus on Franklin's numbers, so we can kind of talk through that and how the formula treats the town of Franklin and Franklin Public Schools vis-a-vis state funding and that's funding requirements. What we'll do first, and I'll start off, I'll give us just a very quick kind of overview of where the governor's budget landed as it was filed back in January. So the governor's budget filing goes to FY27 budget. So the governor's filing usually sets the floor, right, on where Chapter 70 is going to land. And this year is notable because FY27 represents the final year of implementation of the Student Opportunity Act. So you're probably familiar with the Student Opportunity Act that was passed in 2019. Which amended Chapter 70 of the general laws and focused on particularly the foundation budget side of the formula. I'll talk about that in a minute. But this was notable because this was the first major change to Chapter 70 since the Ed Reform Law was passed in 1993. So just a brief history on that. In 93, the state, as you may recall, the Dept case was issued by the Supreme Court. I think at that moment in time, the legislature understood where the court was going to rule in that case, that the court was going to find that the state was not meeting its constitutional obligation to adequately fund public school districts across the Commonwealth. So that set in motion the development of the EDU form law, which was passed really just at the same moment, soon after the court ruling was issued. So what the EDU form law did was establish a foundation budget formula that set an adequate spending level for every district in the Commonwealth, and then define how much of that spending goal should be funded with local revenues and how much should be funded by the state, with an emphasis on issuing funding in a progressive way, so districts with lower ability to pay would receive higher levels of state assistance than districts with higher levels of ability to pay. So that was kind of the watershed moment that set us in motion to where we are today. Fast forward to 2019, the Student Opportunity Act. So what the Student Opportunity Act did was it responded to a set of issues that were identified by the Foundation Budget Review Commission in 2015. The Foundation Budget Review Commission is a legislatively authorized commission that periodically reviews the Chapter 70 formula and identifies areas for improvement. And so what the Foundation Budget Review Commission did at that moment was that it identified some areas where the foundation budget assumptions were not keeping pace with what we were actually saying in terms of spending in school districts. So with that, they focused in particular on the spending assumptions in the foundation budget around the 5 areas I have listed up here on the slide, including benefits and fixed charges, guidance and psychological services, special education, out-of-district tuition, funding for English learners, as well as funding for lower-income students. What's not listed here is also a provision of focus on in-district special ed spending, and I assume special ed rates. We probably should add that to the list as well, but that was another category that was identified. So the Student Opportunity Act focused on those areas. And so what the Student Opportunity Act did was it established new goal rates in these areas in the foundation budget. We'll kind of walk you through how the foundation budget works in a few slides. And set in motion phasing toward those higher assumed spending levels over a 7-year period. Starting originally planned to start in FY21, but with COVID, implementation was delayed a year. So the Student Opportunity Act was not funded until beginning in FY22. And so we were on a 6-year implementation cycle with FY27 being the 6th and final year. So what the FY27 budget does is it fully implements the goal rates defined in the law, plus inflation. So the law established goal rates, right? But we add inflation on top of that annually. And so if you read the law and you look at the rates that we're actually using in the formula, the rates in the law are lower because they're expressed in FY20 dollars, but there's been years of inflation added on top of those goal rates since. So we'll kind of walk through in more detail all those elements in subsequent slides. But where we landed with the governor's budget this year, final year of SOA implementation, is a funding level that's $242 million higher than FY26 funding. It's a 3.3% increase. Compared to prior years of SOA implementation, this was a much smaller increase than we've seen in the previous years. FY26 funding increase was over $400 million. We've consistently seen funding grow $400 million over the life of the SOA. The lower level of increase in FY27 is largely attributable to significant enrollment loss that we saw across the Commonwealth between FY26 and FY27. So we based Chapter 70 on October 1 enrollment counts that were submitted by school districts. That's the fixed point in time that we're using to determine the next year's funding level. So that enrollment number was over 15,000 students lower than the prior October 2024 enrollment. A lot of different reasons
Yeah, I'm just gonna ask one.
for that. Yeah. So I think that the key reasons that we're not seeing the same levels of in-migration that we've seen in prior years to replace students that have left the system through normal immatriculation. That was a big reason. Some of that's due to immigration enforcement. But it's not universally related to that. We saw similar enrollment loss in non-gateway districts as we did in gateway districts, a little less than 2% on average statewide. So it's hard to pin down exactly what's going on. It's clearly a variety of factors. I think sort of immigration enforcement is certainly one of their other reasons as well. So that drove the aid increase down. A lot lower than we would have otherwise predicted. But overall, the growth in funding in Chapter 70 as a result of the SOAs exceeded $1 billion in new funding over the 6-year period. So right now we're at a $7.6 billion funding level projected for FY27. That's the governor's budget. The House and Senate will have their turn. What the House and Senate typically focus on is the minimum aid allocation, and we'll talk more about that in the upcoming slides. So why don't we go to the next slide? We'll go a little bit faster through these. So I won't talk through all the details here, but one of the key elements with SOA is how we count low-income students. So prior to SOA, through some changes that were put in place back in the 2016-2017 period, the eligibility threshold to be identified for low-income was set at 133%. SOA returned that to the 185% federal poverty level. So we expanded the number of students that we're counting. And so we've seen growth, right, in the number of identified low-income students generally over the life of SOA, but in FY27, actually the number of low-income students that we identified fell by more than the number of students that we lost in the system from 400,000 to, I'm sorry, from 419,000 to 400,000. So that was another factor in driving down aid increases, keeping our gateway districts. All right, so let's go to the next slide. The other piece here, which I alluded to on the first slide, around special ed enrollment. So when we talk about foundation enrollment, which is the enrollment basis that we use to establish each district's foundation budget, all students are obviously included in that count. Students that each district is fiscally responsible for, and we'll talk more about what that means in a minute. And students are counted at the grade level that they're enrolled. We don't identify students on IEPs, though, on a census basis. What we do is we apply an assumed percentage to each district's head count to determine an estimate of how many special education students are being served in the district. So SOA increased those assumed percentage levels from 4.75% to 5% for vocational students, and from 3.75% to 4% for non-vocational students. So that 4% rate is applicable to Franklin Public Schools. I'm not sure if you have any Chapter 74 programs in your high school, but if you do, that particular portion of your head count will be subject to the 5% rate. So those percentages seem low, right, relative to the, I'm sure, the identified rate within your school district. The way to think about these percentages is that it's an FTE-based percentage. It's not an head count-based percentage. So in your district, I'm not sure what your special ed rate is. It's probably something closer to 20%, maybe more, of your overall student population has an IEP of some sort. Yeah.
Just I'm trying to understand this. Actually, two questions.
Yeah.
Before you read it. I know we haven't had a chance to review these slides. Is it possible to send it to us?
Absolutely, yeah.
And then specifically with this slide, we're talking about the SOA impacts, how it's affecting special education, special education, but then we talk about the vocational and non-vocational students. Is that still referencing just the amount of funds that are going into special education for vocational schools versus non-vocational? How do we understand this?
Yeah, so these percentages, so what these percentages, and we'll walk through when we get a little bit deeper in the presentation, but we apply these percentages to your total head count, your total foundation enrollment count, to assume how many special education students are being served in the district. And we apply a higher percentage to vocational students and vocational districts than we do to non-vocational students or non-vocational districts. The reason why is that historically there are higher levels of identification in vocational settings than there have been historically in non-vocational. So that's why we apply a higher percentage historically.
So if we have more special education students than the average, then that would end up hurting us. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, let me explain what the percentage means, because it might not be as far afield as you might think. So what the 4% represents, again, is an FTE-based percentage. So what that translates to is that we're assuming that 16% of your students are receiving some level of special ed service 25% of the time. So it's meant to approximate an average. Obviously, you have students that are receiving higher levels of intervention. You have students that are receiving lower levels of intervention than that. That may not be totally reflective of even an FTE count in your district. I certainly fully appreciate that. This is the assumed rate that is established through the formula. It's certainly something that's been subject to a lot of debate and inquiry, and I'm sure it will continue to be. But that's the level that we use in the formula to establish an assumed special ed headcount.
Got it. So
for industry programs.
Just so that I'm understanding, hopefully I'm saying this correctly. This is all, it's based on the formula, the actuals are going to be different.
Right.
But hopefully the formula is fairly accurate. There's a lot of discrepancy.
Yeah. Yeah, and just quickly on the vocational piece, so what the 5% assumes is that in a vocational setting, 20% of your students are receiving special ed services, 25% of the time. Yeah. And I think it's true, we have seen these historically, I don't know if it's still true, but I know it's been true in the past, that there's been higher identification rates in vocational programs and non-vocational programs, but the students in those settings typically have lower levels of need. You don't have the same set of students in a non-vocational district. You're going to see higher levels of need that you wouldn't see in a vocational setting typically. All right.
Just one second. Just wanted to address Councilor Mtg. We're at 23%. So we are a little bit over what the assessment is for our district. So it's 20, we're around 23.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think that's typically what we see across the state. It's 20 or higher in terms of a percentage of your overall head count.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, so I think I got them answered. So you're not saying when you do this that you're looking that we have 4 or 5% of people on IEPs.
Right.
That's just a number, but you're actually looking at a higher. So as a normal, regular, not in education, really makes it just as like 20%. So people can understand that. But if you're doing an estimate, and you're saying you're looking at roughly at 16%, and we're at 23%. That's a big jump in things that we have to figure out how to fund that are mandated to the state for these things that we might not be able to fund. So how do we fix that gap and make it more accurate to what actually the percentage is?
Right. Yeah, so the foundation budget assumes a level of spending, I don't know the rate in front of me, but for in-district students of around $30,000 per student. And it's really meant to serve to reflect costs of students being served who are not eligible for circuit breaker, right? So, and then once you get into the circuit breaker, above the circuit breaker threshold, which is a separate program to reimburse districts for higher cost students. That's sort of where the handout, right? The foundation will get you up to that sort of cut off, and then beyond that point, students become eligible for circuit breaker reimbursement. And that's a separate funding program that we also manage in our unit, not us personally, but our colleagues. But yeah, so the foundation budget formula is really meant to work kind of hand in glove with the circuit breaker program to address funding for higher cost students.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a question, in terms of the special education formula. I understand that, after the SOA is completed, they'll be looking at changing certain aspects of the formula going forward. And I was curious as to whether special education, a more appropriate measure, was something that was being under review for those discussions.
Yeah, nothing formal. I will say, what I neglected to say in my opening remarks, we are working on a study right now for the legislature as authorized this year's budget. And the focus of that study is on local contribution requirements and how we define local contribution requirements in the formula. So we did a number of hearings on that last fall. We're kind of sifting through all that information now in preparation for developing that report. So that's our charge right now. I'm not sure what the future charge will be. I'm sure at some point in the future there will be another convening of the Foundation Budget Review Commission when the legislature decides to reconvene that group, and I'm sure the special ed cost assumptions will be one of the key discussion points in those hearings. But certainly there's a lot of talk and concern about this very topic. But in terms of formal movement in that direction, not yet, not at the legislative level.
Thank you.
Beyond the size that we've already been asked to do on a related topic. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to go to the next slide. I talked a little bit about inflation, so we do inflate foundation budget rates annually. We use an index that we track with the published by the Bureau of Economic Analysis through the Department of Commerce. It's called the Implicit Price Deflator for State and Local Government Services. It's a publicly focused inflation index looking at cost growth in the public sector. So we inflate all of the non-benefits rates within the foundation budget by that inflation index annually. The inflation rate that we're using this year is 2.76%, so that's on top of the SOA-related increases. So those particular elements are increasing by the SOA increments plus general inflation. SOA also directed us to develop a separate rate focused on health benefits cost growth. And so in order to get that rate, we asked the Group Insurance Commission to give us a 3-year rolling average cost factor for all of the plans that they manage. And so that rate for FY27 is 8.29%. And that rate is growing. It was just over 6% last year, and now it's 8.29%. Looking at the 3-year average numbers, it will be higher again next year, as I'm sure you're all experiencing here in the town of Franklin in terms of growth in health insurance costs. So we increased the benefits assumptions in the foundation budget by that higher rate. And this, again, is one of the findings of the Foundation Budget Review Commission and reflected in the SOA. Right. We can skip over this one. You can read about that. That particular outline form, the minimum wage adjustments piece has not played out as expected. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. The other piece too, so the SOA focused on the foundation budget. I think it's important to note. It focused on kind of the adequacy aspects of the formula. How much do we assume districts need to spend in order to provide an adequate level of education services to their students? What it did not do is make changes to how we calculate local contribution requirements, which I think is in part why the legislature is asking us to look at how we do this part of the formula. What the SOA did do, it codified a methodology that was put in place in FY07 called the aggregate local model. That model for determining local contribution requirements was authorized through budget language that year, and then subsequently reauthorized in subsequent budgets until we got to the SOA, at which point that methodology was codified into state law in Chapter 70. So we're going to walk through how we calculate contributions. We'll do that in a couple slides. I think this is the most complicated part of the formula. If you can understand how we calculate local contribution requirements, you've gone quite a long way to understanding how the formula works. Ironically, how we calculate the aids is probably the easiest part of the whole calculation. Yeah.
Can I ask one question before we get into the formula?
Yeah.
You talked about how the SOA increased school funding in those 5 or 6 target areas, which great things helpful, been beneficial for years. But you also said 2027 is the last year of the SOA. What happens next? How much? What's our risk?
Yeah, that's a great question. So where we'll be, right, barring anything else that the legislature might do, assuming there's no other changes that are initiated in FY28, we'll be in an inflation and enrollment growth environment at that point, right? So any changes to the foundation budget at that point in time will be related to inflationary adjustments as well as enrollment-related changes. So if your enrollment goes up, inflation goes up, your foundation budget, will go up more than if your enrollment stays level. So the changes that are being implemented to discrete rates within the foundation budget as authorized through the SOA will be fully phased in at that point. So it will just be inflation and enrollment changes.
So what you're saying is there will be no more SOA, but the baseline is going to be higher, it's just going to increase the back.
Right. It won't be adjusted by any additional factors other than enrollment and inflation.
So it's not as though we're getting, throwing out state numbers here, folks. We're getting 60 million because of SOA, and then that's going to drop to 55 because SOA went away. It's just going to grow at a different rate.
Yeah, and I will say it's important that SOA is a piece of legislation that amended Chapter 70, right? So SOA, when people talk about SOA and Chapter 70, it's really one and the same thing. I think there's some misconception. Not to say that you have a misconception. I think there's that misconception out there that they're two separate and distinct things. It's important to note, though, that some districts have benefited from SOA. Some districts have got significant aid increases that they would not have otherwise received if not for the SOA. Other districts have not received additional aid increases as a result of SOA. And dare say Franklin has been one of those. Right? You've been a minimum aid district, meaning that you haven't required additional aid in order to fully fund your foundation budget, at least in terms of the formula. All right. So, the aid growth has been highly concentrated in about 100 districts, 80 to 100 districts across the Commonwealth. We have a lot of minimum aid districts. We have a lot of districts with declining enrollment, significant declining enrollment over a long period of time. While their foundation budgets may have grown due to inflation, right? They have not grown that fast, and grown fast enough to make those districts eligible for more than minimum aid adjustments.
So it's like but can you just explain what for us so we understand what's a minimum aid district?
Yeah, so we'll talk more about it, but there are two categories of aid in the formula. There's foundation aid and there's minimum aid. Districts that are eligible for foundation aid, when we look at their prior year contribution, when we look at their prior year aid level, right, and their current year contribution requirement, the sum of those two numbers is not sufficient to fully fund their foundation budget. So at that point in time, the state will step in and provide additional aid to get them up to foundation. Yeah. Right. Because the state is constitutionally obligated based on the Dept rule to fully fund all districts at foundation. So that's a line that the state cannot meet. For all other districts where the sum of the district's prior year and current year contribution requirement exceeds the district's foundation budget in the given year, those districts aren't eligible for foundation aid, but the legislature has, decided that districts should get at least as much aid as they got in the prior year, plus a minimum aid increase, a per pupil minimum aid increase over prior year funding. So the governor proposed $75 per student in increased funding, and that's what Franklin is scheduled to get. The legislature usually does more than that. Last year, the legislature settled at $150 per student. I'm not sure where that's going to land this year. I think there might be a little bit more pressure to go to a higher number, though I can't, say that with confidence. And so, it's kind of wait and see. Well, we'll know more when the House comes up with their numbers in April.
Just because this is all new for me, what is the foundation budget like? What number, how do you figure out what the number is supposed to be for a town foundation budget?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute. We're going to walk through that in a couple of slides. So, so just to finish up this point, on this slide we have to highlight how many. Sorry. Yeah. So there are. Okay. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Sorry. All right, we can skip over the charter school. If people have questions about charter school funding and reimbursements, we can come back to that. But that's not our focus here tonight. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Megan. She's going to kind of walk you through how we do foundation, all our foundation budgets, and then we'll go from there. So. Do you want to do the slides?
Sure.
All right.
Thanks. So the goal of the Chapter 70 formula, as Rob was mentioning, was to ensure that every district had sufficient resources to meet its foundation budget spending level through an equitable combination of local property taxes and state aid to get to that adequate spending. In House 2, some of the metrics used to create the foundation budget. The total state target local contribution is 59%. That the state's goal is to ensure that 59% of the foundation budget is coming from local and municipal spending. And minimum aid is $75 per pupil. And that required local contributions that no municipality across Massachusetts has to be paying over required local contributions.
Yeah, just pause here for a sec. So these are key parameters that we set annually in the budget. So SOA says, okay, every year we have to revisit these parameters and set whether these are going to be the parameters that we're going to use in that year's budget formulation. So you may have heard people talk about the 59-41% split in the state funding formula. So this is where that comes from. We'll talk more about how that works in terms of setting local contribution requirements. But the goal here is that 59% of the statewide foundation budget is funded from local revenues, and 41% is funded with state aid. And we'll talk more about how that plays out in a few slides.
What is asset production?
Yeah, we'll talk more about that. That's when we determine municipalities' required effort level. If that effort level exceeds their ability to pay, we're going to bring them down to the effort level that is dictated in the formula is more in line with their local wealth metrics. Yeah. So we'll talk more about that.
So there's 6 factors that change throughout the year that can impact the Chapter 78 as well as the foundation budget. So the foundation budget, the number that changes and influences a locality's budget the most is your enrollment, and that is all the students in your district that the district is fiscally responsible for. So that would also include charter and school choice students that the town is paying for throughout the year. Another factor is the wage adjustment factor that is determined by the Department of Employment of Massachusetts, and that is a factor that changes the foundation budget and will increase the foundation budget if it is estimated that employment costs might be higher in your locality compared to the state average. So in Franklin, Franklin's wage adjustment factor is higher than the state average, so that increases the foundation budget. And inflation is that factor that Rob was mentioning earlier, both the inflation determined by the Department of Commerce as well as the inflation from the group insurance rate. So those three factors together influence how large the foundation budget will be. And we'll get into it on the next slide a little bit more, but the type of students in your enrollment also makes a difference in terms of that foundation budget. Rates are slightly higher for high school students compared to lower grades. There are higher rates for low-income students. There are higher rates for English language learners. So all of that gets folded into the foundation budget. The other three factors I'll mention, and Rob will get into the required local contribution a little bit more, but property values locally, income locally, and a number called the municipal revenue growth factor, which is used to project how much growth might be happening in a locality in the future. So there are three steps when we're determining Chapter 78. First, we calculate the foundation budget for a district, grades, programs, demographic characteristics, as I mentioned. Then it goes into how much localities can afford the required local contribution. And then at the end, we calculate state aid. So each of these is a very specific calculation, and then afterwards we work backwards to look at how much state aid district will get. So this is Franklin's foundation budget for FY27 in the governor's budget. So you can see on the left, we've got these 11 categories of rates that are being applied to each at the top enrollment category. So there are rates being applied for preschool, kindergarten, elementary, junior middle school, high school students, vocational students. And on the right, you'll see those special education student categories. Those were from those assumed percentages we were talking about.
Is there any way you can make that screen?
Can we zoom in a little bit?
I can't see.
Oh, wait, maybe right here. Yeah, I apologize.
I have no trouble.
Maybe we can. Does that help? We can.
Yeah,
All right, maybe we can zoom around. All right, so maybe we can just talk through the. You want to re-talk through the base enrollment groups?
Yeah. So we've got the
Oh,
base.
actually, let me scroll up here. So
Yeah, so these are the students that Franklin is fiscally responsible for, broken out by grade. We've got each category of students, and over to the left, things like administration, instructional leadership, classroom specialists and teachers. These are all rates specified by the SOA. And then applied to those increments that those 6 years of increments to raise those rates specified by the SOA, as well as inflation and benefits inflation have been applied to these. The wage adjustment factor is also applied to the employment categories. And over on the right, we've got these incremental costs above the base. So these are assumed costs that Franklin will experience above baseline enrollment for these special categories of students. In district special education, that 16% to 25 receiving services 25% of the time. English language learners at both the elementary level and at the higher levels, as well as low-income students. there are 12 different low-income groups that locality can fall into, and that determines the level of rate. Franklin is in low-income group 4, so we'll have a slide showing what average per pupil expenditures look like for low-income students in low-income group 4.
Yeah, so I'll just point out a lot of the new money that was allocated through the SOA was driven by the increases of the low income rates. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I noticed that, if you look at special education for a moment, the out-of-district and in-district, I noticed in the bottom, we have like a quarter, or maybe a little less than a quarter of the students that are tuitioned out versus inter-district. And I know you mentioned a little bit about how special education and circuit breakers are a little different. But the cost for out-of-district special education is significantly higher than in-district. But this is saying it's not the same if you look at per student.
Yeah.
Am I getting the right read on that?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and I neglected to say at the beginning, the assumed rate for a special out-of-district placement is 1% of your head count, which actually tracks much more closely to what we see in reality. About 1% of students statewide are in out-of-district special ed placements. I'm not sure what your exact numbers here are in Franklin, but so the foundation budget is assuming that you have 188 in-district special ed students. Again, that's an FTE-based assumption, and then 47. Yeah, I'm not passing that test. 47 out-of-district students.
My concern is this formula accurately reflecting the fact that out-of-district expenditures for the town are a lot more expensive, and the formula is not making that equivocation too much.
Yeah, so this was an area that the Foundation Budget Review Commission focused on. The SOA did increase the assumed out-of-district rate. It has increased by more than inflation over SOA. And again, this is where we have the circuit breaker program, right? Which I should also point out was also amended through the Student Opportunity Act. And the way the SOA was amended through the Student Opportunity, the circuit breaker was amended through the Student Opportunity Act was we fixed the eligibility threshold at the level that it was at. I'm going to get the fiscal year wrong, like FY22. The old eligibility threshold for circuit breaker pre-SOA was set at 4 times statewide foundation. So what we would do is take statewide foundation, divide by the number of foundation students, right? That's the rate multiplied by 4. That was the threshold, right? So that grew every year. There was a concern with rapid increase in foundation due to SOA changes that threshold would get so much higher that far fewer districts would be eligible for circuit breaker funding. So what the SOA did is that it fixed that rate at the FY21. Don't quote me on it yet, I'd have to check that, but the FY21 level is about $45,000 in memory serves, and then increases by inflation annually. So that's grown at a much slower rate than it would have had we continued with the prior circuit breaker eligibility threshold calculations. So there's been more circuit breaker funding that's gone out as a result. And what circuit breaker, the goal of circuit breaker is to fund 75% of the cost above that threshold for districts that claim students at that level of service. And just quickly, the other thing the SOA added was eligibility for transportation reimbursement for out-of-district special ed students, which did not exist prior to SOA. So while not every district has benefited directly from the SOA reforms to the Chapter 7 formula, the reforms to the circuit breaker formula have been more widely distributed across districts.
So I guess the goal of the SOA, when you had before, it said, hey, education funding isn't there. People aren't getting the education they need. Does this formula, when you look at out-of-district and in-district special education costs, does it actually mediate 100% of the problem with regards to special education outreach for students who have special education?
Yeah. I don't know if I can answer that question fully. I will say that, again, repeat, circuit breaker funding has grown substantially since, I don't have the numbers right here in front of me, but we're talking 400 million pre-SOA, now we're at 600 million or higher in certain regular funding, including transportation costs, reimbursements. So this is going to continue to be an area of focus, right? We heard this a lot in the hearings that we ran in the fall. Special education funding continues to be a concern, was a concern in 2016 with the Foundation Budget Review Commission. As we know, those costs are growing, student needs are growing, and we need to continue to meet those costs. So, I don't know if I have a satisfactory answer for you, but this will continue to be an area that gets a lot of attention.
Just to clarify that real quick, we're talking about, again, these are all estimates based on a formula. The special district, the special tuition now is about 1% based on this. For us, we're around 2. So it gives you an idea, like, there's a real intent here, and I think when you look at just how many districts are actually trying to review, they're getting the numbers that work generally, but Franklin as a whole tends to be bulk of these numbers. So if you're looking at these estimates and how we're impacted directly, our numbers are all higher as what we actually have in districts versus what is being estimated by the state. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, Chairman Griffith just, as I was saying, was just ending out. And again, just thank you for any circuit reactions. But just to clarify for everyone listening that this assumes a 16% rate of in-district special ed services at 25% of the time, right? And we're at 23%, and 1% out of district, which of course, as Chancellor says, is much more expensive and we're double that. So I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. And so the Foundation Budget Review Commission met 10 years ago, right? SOA was passed in 2019. Things have moved since then, right? So this thing needs to continue to evolve. It doesn't, it doesn't move as quickly as I think people would like. This is a big thing to change. It takes a while, so I can't predict at what moment the legislature is going to take this back up and relook at it. I will say, we're certainly seeing a lot of energy, a lot of concern around this, even before SOA is fully implemented. So I don't know if that's predictive of when the legislature is going to take this up, but I know they're certainly hearing it. Sorry. Give it back to Megan.
Okay. Really quickly. If you look at the history since I reformed in 1993, usually around every 12 years when I think the state legislators, DESE, start hearing enough comments about the formula, different aspects, right? And I think to Rob's point, this community has to be prepared. I know I've said it a million times, but I'll say it again while we have an attentive audience. This community has to be prepared that, after this election this year, there will be a report put up at DESE later this summer. I think that was in an outside section budget, which led to those hearings. You're looking at FY28, a year from now, in 29. Ironically, that's about 10 years since the SOA in 2018 and 19, right? Even if the laws passed in 19, the issues started arising around 17, 18. They go through the Foundation Budget Review Commission. And so the one before 2019 was in 2006, 2007. And then that was a response to the original Ed Reform Act in 1993, which brought charter schools, MCAS, and Chapter 70 is pretty much seen as one of the most landmark laws I think probably our country's history in education. So I think this community has to prepare it at some point in FY 28, 29, and 30. And I think to Rob's point, he said something very important there, which is, I think as you go through the formula, every community is evaluating the formula and how it impacts that community, right? If you go next door to some other communities, their issues with the formula are going to be different than ours, and ours are going to be different than others, but it still accumulates up to, a situation where you have a majority of communities and legislators hearing that, and so this community, I think this presentation is perfect time. I think the community after the budget cycle is over, after the election in November, I think. You've got to be prepared, and you've got to pay real serious attention to if the legislature brings back the Foundation Review Commission. That is a signal, an alert to us. This is serious now, and I know that it's a little harmless a little later, but I think this is a serious issue. And the last thing I'll say is, really quickly, for folks that weren't around, 8 or 9, 10 years ago, the school committee did host a lot of legislative sessions. I know they still do with our lawmakers. But in 17, 18, and 19, I know Senator Roush, Representative Roy, and then Senator Spilka, who was representing half of Franklin, was very, very clear at numerous forums every year that their priority in Chapter 70 was dealing with special education circuit breaker and also charter school reimbursement. I know they glossed over that one section, but those were priorities. The Senate President was very clear with the district where they were put their efforts, because dealing with the other issues in the formula for Franklin were not going to be advantageous. I think you just heard some of their efforts came out of that. I think special ed circuit breaker around 3-4 million in that time frame. Same thing with charter school reimbursement. They did back up those claims pretty strongly in the SOA. So the SOA did very little for Franklin, but we knew that, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago when the law was passed, and that was pretty well communicated to us. So they spoke to it, they told us what they were going to do, and they did fulfill those commitments. The issues in the formula now for Franklin are different, and we've got to try to adjust and adapt on the fly. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. I appreciate the added voices here. It's really helpful. Reminding me of things that we didn't pick up on. And yeah, you're right. Charter school reimbursement was also part of the SOA, and requiring the Commonwealth to fully fund that entitlement, which it has done since the law was passed.
Hold on,
I just wonder, I'm not critiquing this, I'm not.
Oh, it's fine. No.
I wanted to clarify for anyone who's listening when, conversations about the school budget come up, why there's so much, well, if we are, paying significant more in special education than what the state, expects or assumes that we are, that's I'm just clarifying that, not criticizing.
Oh, no, we don't take it that way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you? I just have a quick question. So we talked a lot about funding and revenue. Secondary side of that, especially when it comes to special education, is tuition increases and the office of OSD. So I'm just curious what your relationship is with them, because I know 2 years ago, there was a 14% across the board. I know that your projected inflation rate is like 2.96. I know they're projecting 3.4. So I understand the revenue aspect of it, but there's also this catch-up that we keep playing. Because of the exorbitant amount, percentage-wise, with tuitions that are extremely higher than what we look at for district. So just wondering what your relationship is with OSD, how that kind of, if there is one, and what that looks like when we're taking these things into consideration, because we can continue to fund, but if our costs are going up and up and up, we're never going to close that gap. So just curious on your thoughts and what that looks like.
Yeah, I can shed a little bit of light on that. So OSP, the Operational Services Division, that's the Commonwealth's procurement arm. They do all the procurement for the Commonwealth side of the procurement rules. They also set rates for out-of-district special education schools, private special education placements, day and residential. So we don't have really input into that rate setting. We are receivers of those rates. Those rates are incorporated into our circuit breaker claim form, right? So districts that send students to those various programs. And a single institution can have multiple rates, right, for the various programs that they run. So we incorporate those rates in our circuit breaker process, and districts that send students to those programs use those as the basis for filing their claims for circuit breaker reimbursement. So I know there's a lot of, certainly a lot of consternation a couple of years ago when those rates increased by so much. Some of that was in response to the pandemic and cost increases that I understand some of the providers were facing, and hiring challenges and retention challenges, and all the similar things that they face that I know districts face. So, that was a particular moment. It's certainly come back to more normal levels at this point, but certainly we're seeing the repercussions of that higher increase that was issued a couple of years ago to those providers.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so far for your patience with all these questions. is it simply too complicated to reimburse a district on actuals instead of the formula that makes these assumptions? Because to me it seems like if we're getting reimbursed for 60% of special ed, but it's really 23, that's a pretty big gap. But maybe there's other cities and towns in the opposite direction. Maybe they'd be getting perhaps more money than they might need for special ed if they pay less than that number. I'm just curious as to why the district can't just give you folks the real number that we have and get funding. Maybe that's naive, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so my understanding of the history on it, and I wasn't there in '93, but the history of it is that the folks at that moment in time were concerned that if they set a higher assumed special ed rate, it would create a perverse incentive for districts to identify students as that for special education programming. And so that's why they set the rates at the levels that they are today. And SOA certainly took that into consideration and increased those assumed funding levels. And as I said, this is going to continue to be a hot topic. Obviously, this is a huge cost driver in districts. I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where we try to track actuals, right? Actual levels of enrollment and census-based counts. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion around increasing the assumptions.
It's certainly worth noting from all of the presentations that I've attended over the years to credit to our school department, school administration. They have reduced, for the watching this, they have reduced the amount of districts and kids by a significant number over the years to try to keep those kids in Franklin and keep those costs down and manageable. So that's truly commendable, especially hearing about this one. And we all know how expensive it is to some of these other district schools can be $80,000, $90,000 a year, depending on the student's needs, right? It's unbelievable.
I just want to make a comment too that it almost is sort of like the curse of like a good nonprofit. The better you are, the better reputation you have as a district and you manage special ed and keep kids in districts so they can go to their friends, they party for sending them out of town. Then it's like you're sort of punished physically. So it's worth mentioning that you're doing well, and it's like we're always incentivized not to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chair. Thank you for your comments, Ted. I wanted to just say we held a legislative forum for all of the local area school districts surrounding Franklin, and the average special ed out of district per pupil tuition has gone since 2021 to 2026, $90,000 to $135,000. So gives you a sense of about a $40,000 increase on private out-of-school tuition students for special education. So that was one. The other piece is our petition legislature to look at the formula to say, if we reimburse at 75%, can you reimburse us by 90%? And the threshold, it's kind of like a deductible. We have to pay the first $58,000, and then they only will give you 75% reimbursement after the first $58,000 is paid. So we looked at, can we lower that number to get the deductible down using that term, it's not what it's called, but ultimately lower the deductible and then increase the reimbursement amount, so it's kind of going on with what you mentioned. I just wanted to point those two things out on the docket.
As I was pointing out, the previous threshold was set at 4 times foundation. If you look at what SOA has done, it's actually now set the threshold closer to 3 times foundation on average. Obviously there are arguments, should it be lower than that? That discussion will happen, but certainly SOA has driven that threshold down, which I think has been a good news story for a lot of districts. I forget where we were here. I don't know that we quite finished getting through the foundation budget. Megan, I think you were talking about the low-income pieces.
Yeah, so Franklin is in low-income group 4, so the SOA established 12 groups of based on percentage of low-income students, and that determines rates for there's a higher rate if there's a higher concentration of low-income students in that district. And well, if, I think we are done with the foundation budget and assumptions, we can go to the next slide, which shows what average per pupil foundation budget is at each low-income group level, unless anyone else has any questions on that.
Yeah, so we'll just, maybe we just highlight the bottom line here. When we do all this math, right? We multiply all the enrollment counts by all the rates, take into account the wage adjustment factor, your low-income group assignment. It gives us a foundation budget for FY27 at just over $68 million for Franklin Public Schools. The thing to keep in mind, this isn't your whole budget, right? This is your operating budget. It does not include capital. It does not include transportation. All right, so those are key omissions from the foundation budget. It's really meant, so it includes school committee expenditures. It also includes eligible expenditures on the town side, right? So I'm not sure how you're structured here, but I'm sure the town's paying health insurance for school district employees. That's probably carried on the town side. That gets counted toward this number. Maintenance, that's picked up on the town side from schools. That gets carried. So it's really meant to reflect both school committee and town costs that are eligible to be counted toward your net school spending requirement. And we'll talk about what that means in a minute. So do you want to talk to this one, Mary?
Yeah, so Franklin's low-income percentage is just over 18%, so that puts you squarely in that 18 to 23.99 category, where the average foundation budget per pupil is, let's see there, 14,000. 178, thank you. 2.1.
Yeah, 14,241, yeah. That's right.
The lines.
Yeah, we're not doing ourselves any favors. So what you can see here, the foundation budgets obviously go up quite a bit the higher the low-income group you're in. And that goes to the point that the low-income rates established by the SOA for districts with higher concentrations of low-income students are really driving a lot of the growth in the SOA. The rates really do go up exponentially when you get up into those higher groups, 10, 11, 12 groups. The other thing I'll point out that the SOA did, which is different from what we had before, pre-SOA we had 10 deciles to define your low-income rate. So where you fell is sort of where you were in the distribution, right? We just set decile cut points. What the SOA did is it set hard cut points between low-income groups. So if you're, and we've had this happen in a couple of cases, if you're a couple students short of, getting up into group 11, there's sort of no recourse, right? It's sort of, those are the hard lines. Whereas I think under the decile system, there's a little bit more fluidity in terms of where you landed, because more or less your relative position in the state is going to stay the same as populations went up or down, numbers of low-income students identified went up or down. You're probably going to land in roughly the same place you did before, but it's a little bit different under SOA with the hard cutoffs. So happy to take any other questions on that's the foundation budget. Yeah.
The prior slide, how do you know students' income level?
Thank you, Steve. I was just going to ask that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was wondering if you wanted to get into that. So the way we identify low-income students is working in collaboration with the Executive Office for Health and Human Services. So after each SIMS collection period, so SIMS is a student information management system. So folks from the district here will be well familiar with SIMS. They're working on it right now. We collect SIMS from districts 3 times a year. The key collection point for Chapter 70 is that October 1 collection. That's what we use for foundation enrollment. But we also collect data in March. That's largely used for MCAS, though we are starting to use that actually for more things related to some of our claim form programs. And then we collect data at the end of the school year. And we use that to calculate sort of student level FTEs for things like per pupil spending and and other calculations. Yeah, so that comes, yeah.
Do parents report income?
No, what we do 3 times a year after each one of those SIMS collection periods, we take our SIMS file, over 900,000 students, we send that over to EOHHS. They match it up against their databases. We've established a matching protocol with them. This is a separate unit from the one that Megan and I work in, but they've got a pretty sophisticated matching protocol that they do to identify students who are receiving SNAP benefits, who are enrolled in Mass Health, who are receiving TFC. They also look at students through the foster care system.
So that's how you get the 118 students.
Right.
Yeah,
so those, and it's not just a one-time, a moment-in-time match. It's actually a 4-period match to try and capture as many students as we can. So the key criteria is that the student has to be enrolled with you on October 1, right? But if they were identified in the match based off that October 1 submission, or the match based off the prior school year, and submission to the end of year SIMS prior year, or the prior year March submission, or the prior year October submission, we'll pick them up and we'll count them as low income. So we're trying to account for the fact that students' eligibility for benefits can change, right? But we don't want to exclude a student if they weren't receiving benefits in October, but they had been receiving benefits for the entire school year the prior year. So we want to pick those kids up. So that's how we do it. This is a methodology that we had to develop back in the 2015-16 timeframe, because at that moment in time, the Department of Agriculture decided that if districts met a certain level of eligibility, they no longer had to collect free and reduced price lunch forms. So that meant that our largest school districts stopped collecting those forms. And that was a key data source for us in order to identify low-income students for state funding purposes. So we had to develop this methodology, which has worked really well. I mean, we've continued to improve it over time to improve the match kind of algorithm. And we're actually, in some districts, we're matching more students now than they ever counted on their paper form submissions. So it has, I think, been an improvement over past practice.
As long as they're not skipped over, that's the main thing.
Yeah.
I have a question, but it might actually be for the school committee. Chair Griffin, at the meeting, I don't remember which one. You had talked about, like, even though we have the free lunch program, people need to fill out that paperwork. Is that what this would be speaking on, like that paperwork, even though the lunches are free, if people were filling out that paperwork for like the free lunch program, would that tie into this?
The answer, I'm going to take a question. The answer is yes. So when the parents apply or self-identify, we collect that. So when the SID report is submitted to the state, we've collected an RN and verified the information to see if they meet folks with thresholds, and then we submit that as part of our data that we've identified students, and that data gets submitted to the state.
So it's actually really important for parents to fill out that paperwork, even though they're not going to have to worry about the lunch actual program.
Right,
So we can get correct data over to DESE.
That's one major reason. The other reasons are it still applies towards your home insurance, your bus, your athletic fee, your activity fees, all those types of fee structures that if the students were not considered based on their economic situation, they wouldn't be able to participate. So we look at trying to level the playing field for kids who maybe don't have the money to sign up for sport. They submit the paperwork, and then they can still have access to the student life. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Okay, I just wasn't sure if they tied in, so I wanted to clarify that. We're going to need to check that.
Yeah, just to clarify a little bit, so a lot of districts still collect the forms, right, because they don't come under the rules of the USDA provision that allows them to qualify all students for free reduced price lunch based on that eligibility threshold. I think you have to give it 60%. Identified rate to qualify for that USDA provision. So a lot of districts are still collecting the forms to run their school nutrition programs. There is still a data element in SIMS that I believe collects that information, but that's actually not what we use for Chapter 70. We're fully reliant on this match that we do with DHS to identify students as low income for state funding purposes. So there's a couple different processes that go on related to this. So we talked about foundation budget. So once we determine the foundation budget, we set that aside for a minute. And now what the formula then does is determine, okay, how much of that target spending level, that $68 million figure for Franklin, should be funded through local revenues and how much should be funded by the state. So we do that through this formula called the aggregate wealth method. And what this does is it sets a statewide funding goal of funding 59% of the statewide foundation level from local revenues and 41% from the state. So hopefully you can see these numbers okay. So in FY27, statewide foundation budget is $15.8 billion based on the governor's budget. So 59% of that is $9.3 billion. So the goal is to fund half of that, $9.3 billion, based off of income, effort. I'll talk about what that means in a minute, and the other half from property effort, right? Based on each city and town's wealth determination. So what's complicated about school funding, and there's a lot of things complicated about school finance in Massachusetts, but one of the real complicated things is that all the taxing authority rests with cities and towns. But we have different kinds of school districts out there. A lot of our school districts are municipal-based districts. We also have regional districts. We also have regional vocational districts. So we have a real complex sort of governance structure kind of overlaid on this local tax system that relies on city and town-based taxation. In most other states, school districts have taxing authority, and they issue property tax bills. But that's not true in Massachusetts, or really, I think, throughout New England for the most part. So due to that reality, we have to take each district's foundation budget and allocate that foundation budget back to a city-town-based foundation budget based on the districts that the municipality belongs to. So in Franklin, obviously Franklin Public Schools, K-12, we also belong to Tri-County. Is it Norfolk County? Yeah. All right, so those are the three districts that you have a share in their foundation budgets. So we allocate those foundation budgets back. We give you, obviously you own Franklin's foundation budget in its entirety, and then we allocate back a piece of those other two districts' foundation budgets based on your share of those districts' enrollment.
Same with the charter schools.
Well, charters are different. All right, charters are not included in the Chapter 70 formula, at least as organizations, right? The way charter funding works, but yet every student at Franklin sends to the charter school is included in your foundation.
Right.
All right. So what we're doing is we're establishing, that obligation to fund charter tuition as part of your state aid profile, right? And then you get assessed that charter tuition through a separate formula. We can probably come back and do another workshop on that. I don't think we can do that tonight, but
That's an overall.
yeah. All right. So we get this 59% goal, right? There's a lot of debate around the 59-41 split. Should it be, should there be more obligation on the state side, less on the local side when we run these numbers? That's certainly a topic of conversation. I think as people continue to talk about the formula, that split will be part of the discussion and whether that needs to be changed. But this is where we stand right now. There's not a huge amount of science behind those numbers. We settled on the 59% back when this model was developed because that's kind of where we were at that moment in time. 59% of statewide foundation is funded through local revenues. So we kind of relied on historical spending patterns in order to set these cutoffs. So, all right, so working on the 59% piece, we determined, okay, we're going to fund some of that 59% from local wealth is measured through state tax returns, income tax returns, as well as equalized property valuations. Do we have the formula file? That actually might be easier. Yeah, you want to talk about that? That might be easier to look at than this. So we're just going to call it formula file, but I think it's probably easier to walk through than the PowerPoint slides. So we have these. So we have the 59%. Right. There's another parameter, right? Another criteria that is established in the formula as well, which requires that no city or town be required to fund more than 82.5% of its foundation budget. Okay, so that's basically sets the 17.5% aid floor for all districts. The rationale behind that is that all districts should receive some state assistance, right, regardless of how wealthy they are. I think that's that was the subject of much debate back when that was established. Should it be 20%? Should it be 15%? Where they landed is at 17.5%. So we have these two kind of parameters, right? We have the 59% funding goal and the 82.5% cap on local contribution requirements. So when we have those parameters in place, we have, there's a function in Excel called goal seek. We give it some criteria, and we have it run the numbers, and it gives us back a couple of percentages that we apply against each city and town's latest EQB data, equalized property value data, as well as its most recent income data based on state tax returns. So you might ask, why do we use EQB? Why do we use income to measure community as well? This is also a subject of much debate back when we settled on this formula. Some people thought we should use EQB only. Some people thought we should use income only. Different approaches benefit different communities in different ways. And so we settled on, okay, let's weight them equally in the formula in order to measure a community's ability to pay. So here are the numbers for Franklin. So in 2024, the equalized valuations reported for the town of Franklin by the Department of Revenue was $8.5 billion. And the aggregate income reported on state tax returns by taxpayers who live in the town of Franklin was $2.1 billion. So these are the numbers that we're using, right? And that we're using to measure your ability to fund your foundation budget. So when we ask Excel to run this math for us, it gives us back a couple of percentages, which kind of function like tax rates, right, that we apply against the reported EQB and the reported income, and you can see those on lines 2 and 5. And we apply those percentages to those metrics, it gives us back two numbers, right, in this case 28.2 million and 34.6 million, that we add together on line 7 to give us a number that we call the combined equity. So this is the total level of funding that, based on the latest wealth data that we have available to us for the town of Franklin, we feel that Franklin can fund towards its foundation, $62.9 million.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Matt.
So I just want to clarify how this down right. So at the state level, for all the cities and towns together, the total split is about 60-40. But when you go town by town, you vary that based on your town's wealth.
Right.
So wealthier towns have to contribute to pitch in more, and less wealthy towns have to pitch in less.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah, that's right. So those rates are going to yield higher levels of available funding in wealthier communities and less wealthy communities. That's exactly right.
Make sure people at home understand.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Thank you.
That 82%, that's as high as
Exactly right. So it takes that into account too. So those rates are set based on the 59% target and the 82.5% cap. Sorry. So that combined net yield number is sort of the key metric that we use. We then compare that number to Franklin's foundation budget, which that number is $72.4 million. That number is higher than what we just looked at on Franklin's foundation budget worksheet because it factors in your share of Tri-County and Norfolk Aggie's foundation budget. So it's a higher number. All right, so that's important to know. So what we do is we say, okay, what's higher? Or I'm sorry, what's the lower number? 82.5% of 72.4 million? Or 62.9 million. And it turns out that 82 and a half is less for the town of Franklin. So you are a capped community. You are a community that's, we expect you to be able to fund your schools at the max level, right, based on your wealth data. So that number for you is 59.75 million. Okay, so that sets an 84 for you at 17 and a half. So here's another moment where we kind of set these numbers aside. We call these the target local share and the target aid share. So your target local share is 82.5%. So, and yeah, this is something we're going to be looking at in the study that we've been asked to do by the legislature. Right? How many districts, how many communities are being caught up in the 82.5% cap? One of the criticisms that we've heard is that we see a wide variety of communities now that are caught up in 82.5%. Right? We see the wealthiest communities in the Commonwealth, and we see communities that are wealthy but not nearly as wealthy. And so I think some of the power of that cap has sort of waned over the years as more communities have gotten swept up in it. So that's something that is certainly going to be a topic that we're going to be looking at in the report that we write. All right, so once we have that goal established on the left-hand side of this report, then we go to the right and we say, okay, how much was Franklin required to contribute in FY26? So we always go back to the prior year. And in your case, that's 55.7 million. And that includes your required contribution to Franklin Public Schools, as well as your minimum local required contributions to Tri-County and to Norfolk County. All right. So then we're going to grow that prior year spending level by a number that Megan referenced at the beginning, called the Municipal Revenue Growth Factor. This is a number that we get from the Department of Revenue, so we get a lot of data from the DOR to help us run this formula. So that MRGF is meant to reflect your anticipated revenue growth from one year to the next, taking into account Prop 2.5 limits, as well as other revenues that you have available to you, including local excise, hotel meals, UGA, so other general government assistance that you get from the DOR, that gets factored in. So that gives us a percentage. In your case, it's 4.11%. And apply that percentage to your prior year contribution requirement to establish a funding goal for FY27. So that, when we do that math, it's 58 million. So when we compare that goal to your target, right, so 58 million is a percent of your aggregate foundation budget, that number is 80.12%, so it's just below your target, 82.5. Now, there's a couple of provisions here on the formula. One is called the excess effort reduction. I think somebody asked a question about that earlier. So pre-SOA, we had a lot of districts that were subject to the excess effort reduction, meaning that when we did this math, their preliminary contribution was above target. And so the formula requires us to bring communities fully down to their target if they're above target. With SOA, because foundation budgets are increasing so quickly, we go looking for that 59% local share, and what we find is that we're not quite there, right? So that's why we're seeing more districts fall into the 82.5% cap, and why more districts are actually below target on their local contribution side, which makes them subject to potentially some acceleration factors to get them closer to that target. And that's what happens at the bottom right-hand side of the sheet. So your shortfall for target is 1.7 million, it's 2.38% shortfall. If your shortfall is more than 2.5% and less than 7.5%, we would add a percentage point to your growth factor to get you a little closer to target. And we have some cases where the shortfalls are greater than 7.5%, so we're actually at 2 percentage points to the growth factors of those communities to get them closer to their targets. That doesn't apply, at least this year, to Franklin. You're below that. So what we do in your case is apply the growth factor to your target contribution, and that gives us a required contribution level of $58 million. All right. So that's the town-based number. Are there any questions about that?
Go ahead, to the chair. What percentage of communities are at that 82%?
Oh, I don't have, yeah, it's a lot more now. Oh, God, it's got to be over 200. 351 cities and towns. So that's flipped, right? It used to be that we had probably over 200 communities that were above it, right, that had the excess, eligible for the excess section. Right, under SOA, that is completely flipped. And now most cities and towns are below effort and subject to these acceleration factors. And there are far fewer communities that are above their required effort subject to the excess effort reduction. So that's been a dynamic. We'll be talking about that in this report, right?
Jane?
I'm still trying to process all this. It's very, very confusing. But you were talking about going by like taxes, when people do their taxes, as it might have been a slide before. I'm having a delayed processing. But my question is, if you're going by like the taxes that people in the town of Franklin have filed, that's not incorporating seniors that are on Social Security that don't have to file taxes, or people on disability that don't have to file taxes. So that's an issue I think that needs to also, and I know it's not in your purview, but it has to be addressed because there's actual residents, not just in this town, but in other towns, that their data is not being considered because they don't have to file, but they fall under that low income.
Right.
And for towns to do overrides and that kind of stuff, they can't afford it. So the numbers, I know it's probably the best that can be done with the data that is given at the time, but there's a lot of room for improvement. Because they're not taking into the fact of things that aren't being reported. Is that something they're looking at, or when they start doing the negotiation, do you know if they're going to start looking at more various things, a widespread, or just go by specific?
Yeah, I mean, if people don't file tax returns, right, they're not included in this aggregate number, right, which is in fact driving the overall ability to pay the community, right? So the more folks you have living in the community who aren't filing taxes, who aren't meeting the income threshold required to file a tax return, that's going to make those communities going to look sort of less wealthy in this based off this methodology, which impacts their aid targets and their contribution targets. Though I take your point, right? I mean, there certainly is aggregate income the best measure of the community's ability to pay. That's certainly subject to debate. Again, the split between these two things is certainly one that we talked a lot about. You kind of go back and forth. We've heard criticisms, well, people, communities don't tax incomes, right? So why do we use income as a metric? We really are trying to capture the overall kind of wealth of the community through that metric. The other side of it, though, other communities that have high property values, but maybe the people who live year-round in the community, the incomes of those folks aren't reflective of the income of the people that own the high-value properties. In those cases, those communities are really strongly advocating that we need to use income as one of the measures. So it's a real subject for debate. I think this will be a topic that gets talked about in terms of how we rate these things. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So you have one question around the municipal revenue growth number.
Yeah.
4.11. Makes sense using it, but at least perhaps I missed where. I get you're getting that number from the Department of Revenue, but how is that? Do you have any visibility on that?
Yeah, I won't pretend to be the MRGF expert. I can refer you to the DOR DLS website. They have a similar it's not quite as many tabs on that worksheet as this one, but they've got a whole worksheet that they put out kind of describing in detail how they calculate those growth factors annually. This is a calculation that was developed with ed reform back in '93, because this is a factor that we've used over time, for a long time, in order to establish local contribution requirements. So it's a well-established practice. I wouldn't pretend to be able to walk you through that sheet or even pretend to be able to do that right now. Yeah.
So those numbers that Rob just put up are key. You could go back over Meg just to the report. So in 1993, to Councilor Callaway's point, number one, point well taken on the folks that don't file taxes. Your Social Security. I would say one, obviously that formula applies to all 351 cities and towns. So if you're not people not filing taxes here, they're not in every other town. So it is an equal playing field in terms of the formula. But in terms of Franklin, and some of you really appreciate this, in 1993, the wealth model on how you determine Chapter 70 was single-handedly on land value. So actually the argument that's being made now about income is actually the same argument that was made in 2005, 6, and 7 by the town of Sandwich. There was a group called Fair Share for Sandwich who basically said the formula is unfair because we're land rich, but our wealth is actually not as great as you think on the Cape, or not as high as other communities. And that's actually where the aggregate wealth model single-handedly came from. You really kind of actually pinpointed it to literally the town of Sandwich. And one of the reasons was per acre cost of an acre of land in Sandwich was exorbitantly high, but it was still a middle-class community where they're middle income. So what they did in 2006 to balance that equation out was to add in the aggregate income. And I think for Franklin, the reason why I point that out is in 1993, you were not a land-rich nor an income-rich community. And so when the town grew with house lots of 250 houses a year, you were actually had a huge enrollment, which gave the town an unbelievable amount of Chapter 7 money. When you get to 2006 and they changed to the aggregate wealth model, things started to kind of even out a little bit more. That's really where your growth boom kind of stopped roughly, and that's when you hit your peak enrollment of about 6,300 students. I think it was 6,255, but that's really where you hit your peak enrollment was around 2008, 2009, where you're still getting a tremendous amount of Chapter 70 money, but the actual income wealth did not actually come into Franklin at that time. When I got here 10 years ago, the average house value in Franklin was roughly around $400,000. It might be a little bit over, a little bit lower. If you look at today, what is it now? $750,000, $775,000. Your income value as well has gone way up over those last 10 to 15 years. So when the formula says the town of Franklin is in a low-income category of formula, what they're saying is essentially you have both the land wealth and the actual money wealth to actually fund your foundation and minimum aid budget at a much higher level. And that's the inconvenient truth, I think, of where we're at in the Franklin situation, is now because of the boom and the valuation of homes in the last really 5, 6, 7 years, plus the amount of money that people have that they're putting in on their income taxes. If you went back and looked at that 10 years ago, those numbers are probably almost half of what they are today. And if you went back to 1993 or even back to 2006, back to 2006, I guarantee you the formula was not a major concern when they brought in the aggregate wealth model, because you were still fairly not very land rich, although that was getting higher, but your income levels as a community were nowhere near something that was going to deduct or plateau your Chapter 70 funds. And that's exactly why you've seen, since the Student Opportunity Act, that's why you've seen a commitment from our legislators where they've had to try to prioritize charter school reimbursement and special education circuit breaker reimbursement and all the other issues that we know of, because this was a dynamic that was coming into play 7, 8 years ago, and obviously we know today, the town's ability to pay, and I say this with ultimate sensitivity. I'm well aware that not everybody in Franklin has the ability to pay for the override questions that have been out there. I think that's exactly why Franklin, the overrides hit 49-51, and they were both pretty close to being split, almost 50-50 vote in both cases because the town is really at that central point of dealing with its ability to pay, and yet not everybody in the community, like Lexington, like Arlington, like Milton, which are all districts that are also plateaued, but they can go out and pass a $10 million override because they have that wealth in the community to be able to pay it, and that's why you see your override passing at 60-40, 65-35, and that's why the town of Brookline, by the way, is now looking at proposing a $24 million override. Stunningly, it doesn't seem like many people in Brookline seem to be concerned about that designation. It just seems like astronomical. So I appreciate the 2 minutes to go back. I thought maybe some of that historical 30-year context would show why those numbers are important. And the last quick thing I'll say to Rob's point is, this is the issue, or one of the issues, that will unquestionably be part of our report and will be a big feature that you're going to see in the Foundation Review Commission over the next 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Jamie. It's really helpful. The other thing I'll just add, that the formula was established in '93. It wasn't relying on updated wealth metrics. Kind of where you started is where you stayed in terms of your local effort determination. And what that did is put communities in a situation where they were treated differently from their peers who were presumably in a different ability to pay bracket, yet expected to contribute less than maybe they were. So that was another impetus behind this reform that was put in the early 2000s, was to use updated wealth data, right, to establish local contribution targets. So that's a key feature of this approach.
Thank you for that, thank you, Jamie. Over on the right of your spreadsheet, I could have sworn I saw something when you said we were falling short about 1.9 million from where you wanted us to be. That 1.7. So we're reading that right? Regardless of whole harmless, which I'm going to talk about later, but everything was perfect based on these formulas. We would be contributing 1.7 million more to our town education.
Yeah, I'm sure you are, right? If you look at what you actually are spending, I'm sure your actual spending far exceeds what you're requiring you to spend. So this is setting spending requirements. But districts are free to spend as far above their requirements as they see fit. And a lot of districts do that, right? So most districts spending is about 25-30%, in some cases even higher of their requirements for spending levels. I don't have Franklin's numbers right here in front of me, but I assume you're in that.
I'm just curious, we have a lot of people listening. Where are we with that number?
What number? Hold on.
What we're spending over our requirements.
I'd have to go to these guys. You got a lot of numbers, John. Just pulling that up.
So while we're looking at the exacts, if you're looking at everyone in aggregate, we're in the bottom 21st percentile of what we're contributing to our students. So even if, I guess, as you said, most communities do fund significantly over, we're not really amongst them. We're the only ones that are barely doing that. So the threshold is very low. Most towns, not all towns, hit that threshold. But that doesn't really account for a lot of costs we actually deal with and what is going to be expected. So as I'm looking at the exact numbers for where we're at versus what's expected, we are very low on what is actually being funded compared to the state as a whole.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have that number at the top of my head.
I think it's important for this conversation.
It's strange because that's right. It's in the bottom quarter percentile. I think we've seen slides from the school committee almost every presentation. But you have to also juxtapose that with the low income category that you have here, right? So if you look at that chart in those categories, we're still very high on the ability to pay metric. We don't. So this is part of the story, I think, is that we are in that lower level tier of what we end up contributing on that number that Paul just referenced, which is completely true. But that's where the hard part is. There's also the data that shows town of Franklin by this model, and it's just this formula. It's not how we all feel qualitatively. We also are one of the more affluent communities in the state of Massachusetts when you look at it relative to 351 cities.
So yeah,
Both things can be true, But that's actually what tells some of the whole harmless story. Some of the other stories that are there is that you have these kind of competing dynamics through the formula that are making it hard to bring up these things.
It was also a very fascinating statistic that we have 19% of registered children considered going.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because I don't think many people would know that if you ask them that. That's almost 1 in 5 kids going to Franklin Public School System.
And this was something I think the school committee and the superintendent, Superintendent Ahern, when she was here, I think saw that trend starting 6, 7, 8 years ago. I think it's been a part, I can't speak to it, yeah. But it's in your enrollment report, but I know that it's been presented at their annual budget presentations. She highlighted that even just before the pandemic, and continued to harp on it as that number, the 19%, is going up fairly quickly each year. It's growing.
So here's the number in answer to that question, we were able to grab it. So based off FY25 reported spending, Franklin's at 138% of their required fiscal spending.
I was just going back to the initial goal of state aid. Wasn't it, or isn't it, to kind of level the playing field between how much, say, some communities spend for education, and then, obviously wealthier communications we're funding at a higher rate, and poor communities are less. Isn't that the goal of state aid? And are we still accomplishing that now, especially if we're...
Yeah, we have a slide toward the end, and we'll try to get there quickly here, because I know we're running long. Yeah.
I just want to hop on something that hasn't really broached yet. All the conversations so far have been about how the estimates we have are incorrect, and the types of numbers that we're looking at are basically we need more, special education costs for low-income costs. I do want to make sure that we also remind people that harmless still hangs over our head. When we talk about things being fair, when we talk about things being reevaluated, we are looking at the parts that benefit us. But if whole harmless is brought into kind of equality across the entire state, we would forfeit roughly $14 million. Yeah. So we're talking about a couple million here. We're looking at, if we double the special education out of district cost rate, that's $2 million more. If we're looking at some of the other adjustments here, it's $1 million here or there. But I just want to make sure that we're being really cautious and cognizant of when we talk about things being more fair. Every other district in this state, except Boston, looks at us and says that's not fair. We're second only to Boston in the amount of harmless that we have remaining. So I just want to make sure that we are being very, very aware that anyone else watching this is staring at us saying, well, that's not fair either. So I think the overall system, yes, for a lot of these costs that have been out of control for a while, we are looking for additional help and support. And that's also, as Jamie pointed out, why our representatives have focused very heavily on special ed costs and transportation costs is because as soon as you go down the avenue of really equalizing the playing field, we have to, as a community, find an additional $14 million to stay exactly where we are. So you talked about a lot of those balances. Jamie, kind of went down that avenue of we've made a lot of changes as a town to what makes up this town when it comes to the state's assessment of what we can pay. We continue to benefit from this in a lot of ways, but we have not yet seen the true cost. So I just want to, before we get too far into those weeds, those conversations about balancing things out and the state contributing what they should, we already benefit significantly more than we should by that exact calculation.
And it's been like that for a while.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, thanks again for all the comments. This is really helpful. So just to get back to where we're at, so we established the town's contribution requirement, right, 58 million. What the formula does next is it allocates that spending goal across all the districts where Franklin sends its students. That lower part of the table. So the way that we do this is, compared to other parts of the formula, fairly straightforward. So what we do on row, what's that row number? Row 7, right? So we look at your share of each district's foundation budget as a percentage of the town's total foundation budget. So that includes Franklin, that includes Tri-County, that includes Norfolk. So those pieces there on row 7 represent those foundation budget amounts that Franklin shares in. And so we determine what those percentages are across the town's entire foundation budget, and then we allocate your contribution requirement on row 5 based on those percentages. So 93%, close to 94% of that number is going to Franklin as a required contribution level. A little more than 5% is going to Tri-County, and less than 1% is going to Norfolk. So that's how we allocate the dollars, and that's what drives the aid calculation in the final step. I will say just quickly, so that number that we calculate for Tri-County, that's used as the basis for setting their assessment, the town's assessment of Tri-County regional location schools, right? So they use that to determine your minimum local contribution requirement, and then, I don't know if they assess above that or not, but if they do, that's all done based on their regional agreement. But just focusing back on Franklin Public Schools, so this is kind of the bottom line, right? This is where you get you see where you land with your state aid growth. Once we do all of that, right, the foundation budget, the contribution requirements, those are all very complex parts of the formula. The aid calculation is actually fairly straightforward. As I described at the beginning, what we do is we look at the aid that you're receiving in the prior year, FY26, that's row 1. Then we look at row 3, the required contribution level for the upcoming year, $54 million. We add those two numbers together, right? And if those numbers exceed your foundation budget, which they do, then you don't need any additional foundation aid to get up to foundation. The other data point here to the gentleman's comment, the amount of aid you need in order to get to foundation is $13.5 million. Last year we got $30.4 million. So that's your base aid, right? So that's your starting point. There's been a strong commitment in the formula to guarantee that you do not get any less than what you got in the prior year, plus a minimum aid adjustment, right, if you don't qualify for foundation aid. So you are in the minimum aid category. So the way we calculate that minimum aid increase, the government was $75 per pupil increase. So that amounts to $355,000. So the math there is pretty simple, right? It's just that $75 multiplied by your foundation enrollment of 4,700 students. I will note, so your enrollment did decline quite a bit. I'm sure you're well aware, from FY26 to FY27. So your enrollment probably declines by more than what we saw as a statewide average enrollment loss. I think I said we were more around 2%, so you guys were over double that enrollment loss. So I know that's kind of a reverse from where you were. I've been at the department for over 25 years now. I remember when I first started there working in school finance. Franklin was a district we talked a lot about because Franklin was growing more than anybody else in the state. As I think Jamie said, your enrollment topped off at over 6,000 students at one point. So, yeah, so that's certainly quite different today. And it's certainly driving the aid picture to some extent. But to the points that have already been made, yeah.
I don't want to interrupt your flow.
No, go.
Hitting the zone right now.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Just the net school spending percentage, I think is important as we walk away. We spent 13%. This was from FY 2020. We're going to reproduce this for the most active numbers we have. This is what I would call a pulse moment. 13% more than the requirement. But when you do that, I had a slide on Hockomock because that seems to be something we can all kind of wrap our heads around. So if you look at this, and we'll produce this again, reproduce it, it's a bar graph where we fall at 13%. And when you look across the board, you can see Canton's at 50, Foxborough's at 41, Milford's at 16.6, North Attleboro's right with us at 13.5, we're at 13.3. Just a few others I'll name. 26% Plainville. Rentland's at 45%. So everyone's spending over. So I just would want the takeaway to be that we're spending over the amount, but that's out of the ordinary for districts. Just to clarify my point. The second piece is around the enrollment. It has declined. We have the KIPS projections that are in the budget book, and then also the lower line. You can see where we have declined during that time. I'm thinking back to the peak years when I was an assistant principal at some of these schools over that time. And then what we've noticed in the next 2 years, it looks like it starts to swing back. But ultimately, the other piece in Franklin that's unique that Dr. McKibben pointed out is we have many single-family homes with folks that no longer have children that they're raising in them who are still in their home. And that's part of kind of where we're at economically and for a host of reasons. So that's an interesting fact because the way Dr. McKibben presented that, he said in communities where that's the case, it takes like a life event or a milestone before anyone would move because their home is their best option right now. They work hard, they invest in the property maybe at some point, and it makes the most financial sense. So I think those are all pieces that we are thinking about in Franklin as we move.
But that also moves into the point where, yeah, I would love to sell my house, my 4-bedroom house. I would sell it in a minute.
I'm not telling you to.
No, but I really would. But I can't buy a ranch for $800,000. Right? Why, I might as well stay where I am. I think that's the trend all over the state. Really, to be honest with you.
It makes sense. I got it.
Mr. Chairman. Could you just slide that over, go back to the last slide? Thank you very much for giving the total.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, which slide? Oh,
the one that shows the $30 million total.
Yeah, right.
Because I was going to ask you how we got to that.
Yeah.
So, even though, if I read this right, maybe it was some septic slide. I think it's off to the left.
Yeah, so if you look at row 4, you found, so in order to
based on the formula and when our base budget would be and our ability to pay, I mean, the state really could give us $13 million and change to meet the requirements that you're laying out.
Right. That's right.
But you give us at least what we got last year for legislation or rules requirements.
Right.
Is this the whole harmless that we're talking about?
Yeah, so this
is that the number that's probably enough?
Yeah, this is often what's referred to as hold harmless, right? It guarantees the same amount of aid that you received in prior years, which has been built up over decades, right? And increased rapidly during the high growth period here in the town of Franklin. But since your enrollment has been kind of steadily declining, which has meant that your foundation budget hasn't grown as fast as it did when you were in that growth period. So you built up this sort of over foundation aid balance, so to speak. Yeah.
Just to see where that came in, because I was looking to tie this back to our $30 million.
Right.
This was very helpful.
Yeah, and I we got some public comments from folks, or frankly, maybe folks in this room related to the study that we're doing. I guess I hadn't looked at it, but I think it is true that Franklin's above foundation aid is only second to Boston in terms of dollar amount, so it's significant.
So I wanted to know what Chairman Griffith's point about not making my increase to the formula, but I do think there's one big thing that we kind of don't talk about a lot. People often ask me why Franklin is in such a tough financial position compared to other towns. The Proposition 2.5 is part of it, but there's other half of the story that we get talked about enough. So imagine two neighbors, we're on the same street, same income, same tax bill. One household has 2 kids in public schools, the other has 4. Which family has the harder time making ends meet? That's Franklin. Statewide, 14.1% of Franklin residents, or Massachusetts residents, are between the ages of 5 and 18. In Franklin, that's 16.4%, which is about 15.3% more kids in the state average that we have to educate, that that we don't have the access resources to do that. Our single-family tax bill controlled for per capita income is right in the middle of the state. So you get the same paycheck, more kids, and a law of Proposition 2.5 that says you can't get over without a town vote. So my question is does Chapter 70 account for the percentage of the town's population being educated by the town? And if it doesn't, should it?
Yeah, no, it does not. I don't know if I can answer the question of whether it should. I'll leave that to the legislature, I think. But this is the scene we heard again in the public comment sessions, right, around, in a declining enrollment environment, which is what we're in now, statewide. There's in each city and town, there's a smaller and smaller constituency of folks that access to schools. So, obviously that makes it challenging in order to get Prop 2.5 overrides to support the schools. I fully get the point that Jamie is making. Folks are on fixed incomes as the population ages. It's tough to take on that increased tax burden. So, yeah, I think that's certainly, again, I don't have the answer here, only to say that I think that will be a topic for conversation as we go down the road. Are there other measures we need to look at to differentiate between districts and the burden that they're bearing relative to other districts in terms of population, demographics, districts that have higher percentages of school-age children versus, relative to others, and how that would play out in formula. Right.
And I do agree that harmless is very serious, and I do think that takes priority number one in terms of what Franklin's looking at. And I did want to ask you directly, has DESE ruled out recommending changes that would reduce or eliminate the guarantee for communities like Franklin?
Again, that wouldn't be for us to recommend. So we're kind of the technical service providers in state government relative to the formula, to be quite honest. So we work closely with, we're an executive branch agency. We work for folks at A&M, folks in the governor's office. That's the key role that we play in developing their budget recommendations based on the policy directions that they want to take. We also work with the legislature, right, sort of on an as requested basis to help them model various scenarios, and played a big role in terms of modeling various scenarios for them on the development of SOA. We also modeled a number of scenarios for Governor Baker when he proposed his sort of version of the Student Opportunity Act. So that's kind of the role we're playing.
Have you modeled scenarios around full timeless with the legislature currently?
Yeah, we certainly have. Like I said, there's been a strong commitment really across the board because we have a lot of districts that are in harmless now. There's a broad constituency for people of districts or municipalities that have an interest in maintaining prior year funding levels and guaranteeing at least a minimum level of increase year over year. So I think you're in good company in terms of advocating for that position statewide. I think there are only about 60 foundation age districts in FY27, so most districts are in the minimum grouping.
I just wanted to make a quick point. I think Councilor Mtg brought up a great idea, a great way to put things, where two households, same costs, there are definite limitations to the overall ability to fund. Also make sure that we look at that from a different perspective, and especially for households where kids have moved out or gone on to bigger and better things. The time that it takes for a household to repay the cost for putting the kids through K-12 is measured in decades. So for everyone who's had students go through our school systems and they've really been able to see great benefit from that, the town as a whole is continuing to pay for that long after those students no longer go to school. So as we're looking at override discussions, we're talking about how there are those mixes in the ability to kind of comfortably pay that. The overall benefit to those households far outweighs that difference. And I do understand that there's a lot of conversations we have around it, but I want to make sure people understand the payback. Even though it might not be in the day-to-day value or paycheck, right now, the long term is massive. And I think it comes back to something that we mentioned multiple times in school committee, where the moral necessity to make sure that these students have an opportunity is that much more important, especially in those situations where things might be constrained. People coming here being able to make sure that we get a fantastic education should be our focus. And yes, in situations where it might be more challenging for some, I think that there's also a question on those who can to be able to contribute more and we can explore ways to possibly do that. But yeah, it really does balance out in a lot of ways. Those individuals may have tighter situations now, but in the long run, because of those contributions, it really does pay back multiple-fold. Thanks.
I can kind of piggyback on that. As I have had three children go through the school system, and they know very well. Council Malloy and Council Bell, they actually all went together. There's kind of one rule you could always use. Somebody paid for me. That's you got to pay for somebody else. You know, that's the way I look at it.
I just want to make sure my comments are clear. I was not saying that was an analogy to Franklin, where as a town, we have a tax base that's paying for more kids compared to other towns. That's my point. Yes. I just want to make that clear.
Right. How much further do you have?
Yeah, we're pretty much done. We've gone on for a while here.
We have a 10 o'clock.
This is the last slide we were going to show.
We're so close.
Yeah, I appreciate all the, I think my wife just dialed my number here. Yeah, this is our last slide. I think we got a question, one of the 3 questions that we got is how equitably is Chapter 78 distributed across the state. So one of these presentations wouldn't be complete if we didn't have a scattergram to throw up. So this meets that requirement. So this graph is just showing, districts arrayed based on their percentage, the percentage of the population who are identified as low income compared to how much Chapter 78 they're getting on a per pupil basis. So you can see that the aid lays out in a fairly progressive way, but it's certainly not perfectly progressive, right? We have districts that have similar levels of poverty that are getting really different aid levels, but for the most part, it plays out that districts that have higher need populations are getting more state assistance. Some of the inconsistencies in distribution are due to some of the hold harmless factors that we talked about. Other factors could be at play here too, but I think generally, the aid is distributed fairly progressively. Could this be tightened up? Probably. And this is the work that we do, right? We're trying to tighten up this distribution, keeping in mind that we want to make sure that districts can count on some level of predictable level of funding through this program. So with that, I think we'll just close out this presentation. We're happy to take any other questions that you may have.
Sorry, this is kind of obviously the people out there watching are going to be asking this question. So, federal government's role in all of this is there any contribution whatsoever coming from the Department of Education at the federal level to help with the formulas that you presented, or is it entirely driven on state?
Yeah, this is entirely a state-funded program, and there was a period of time during the Great Recession where we really relied on federal emergency funding to backfill lost state revenue to actually guarantee that we could fund districts at foundation. That was kind of a once, I hope we don't see that moment again. That was kind of one moment in time when the feds did backstop us in terms of this program. But by and large, this is a state-funded obligation. We rely on federal funding to support our Title grant programs, largely Title I, Title II, IDEA, right? All the federal Title grants that districts get, they're run out of different units within the agency. But this is a state obligation, right? This is a constitutionally mandated obligation that the state is funding.
Thank you. I think to the majority of taxpayers who's going to be concerned with here, pay all this money to the federal government, pay money to the state government, and pay my local government. Why isn't there enough to cover these costs? Well, it's pretty clear there isn't enough, and if we're spending, what's the number, 14,000 per student? Something, and if you have, to Councilor Marjola's point, if you have one kid, most likely, your tax bill is $14,000 a year. There's a few people maybe, but most. So if you have 2 kids, and now you're 28, and you're taxing, I can see why that number just keeps getting more and more and more, basically supplemented, because you're not, as the person living in that house, you're not paying that local taxes, so the community is funding your child to go to school. And hope is that you're going to stick around well past your kids have gotten out of school to make up that money. That is the hope. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Respect to Mr. Councilor Ledger. So although the feds don't really help the state does a great job trying to help really support using our tax funds, our responsibility trying to come back to the schools. We do have direct funding from some of the federal government agencies. We get as a school district around 1.5 million. But that's accounted for under separate line items. On our budget, we actually break out pretty much all the grants you see us get are federal grants for very specific reasons. So it's not counted in all these calculations, but we locally are able to bring in some. Yeah, it's one of those where there's very little change in the years, so we don't really see significant adjustments. The exact risk is one of those, I think this year and the next couple years more than most, we don't know. So we do try to find the best we can, but as of right now, we've seen a stable level. We just haven't really seen any increases to actually account for costs.
I just wanted to add to that point for federal impact. We are losing 15% of our Title I, which accumulates to $27,000. So that is coming down.
$27,000 loss for the
Title I grants that we,
Yeah, so there is a statewide reduction in our Title I award due to the feds run a different census to identify low-income students and what we've talked about here that we use for Chapter 70. So when they take those low-income counts, from my understanding, there was a reduction in the number of low-income students that they used to determine our Title I award statewide, and that led to a reduction in the amount of money that we got as a state, which in turn then reduces the amount of funding available to districts. So that has been an impact recently in that funding stream.
All right. And Roy, we're promoting for a panelist here in a second. You guys can hold on one second. Yeah. Go ahead and unmute Jeff. I think you all got that.
Okay. There you go. Again, first of all. Thank you. I want to say thank you to Rob and Megan for enduring a lengthy presentation. They did a great job. Very helpful information. A couple of things. Let me give you some good news. I'm still here at the State House debating the fair share, surplus money, supplemental budget, and I have good news for my dear friends in the Franklin School Committee that my amendment was adopted to redesign and modernize the Franklin Middle School library space. So that there's some good news. The question I have, and I think it needs to be amplified at the meeting. I heard a figure of Franklin being $14 million for whole harmless, but if you actually do the math, the actual aid that Franklin gets is approximately $30,500,000, and the foundation aid that it would be entitled to is $13,500. So Franklin is actually getting additional aid of $17 million. Am I correct on that figure?
He's correct.
You're correct, yes.
So $17 million, and some folks have suggested to me that I should be pushing to revise the foundation aid formula. And I have been resistant to that, and I have been telling folks it's not a good idea to ask the legislature to get involved in revamping the formula, because that would result in a hit to Franklin of $17 million. And I don't think the citizens of the community want to get $17 million less in state aid. And as it was reiterated a few times during the meeting, Franklin's an anomaly. in Massachusetts. You get a huge amount of aid that would not be justified under the formula. And that's because your legislative delegation fought hard for that whole harmless agreement. And I don't think we should be tinkering with that whole harmless and asking folks to revisit the formula. Just want to see if everybody's on board with that concept.
Lots of nodding.
We can't find 17 million.
Mr. Chairman? Just Jamie, you mentioned a few times that there's likely going to be a schedule review anyway through the legislature or DESE kind of review and evaluate that we're pushing for that might occur naturally.
There was an outside section in this year's state budget to have DESE do a report, which I think Rob and Meg illustrated earlier. And I know the school committee and the superintendent and everybody have gone to a couple of listening sessions to get their feedback, and I think they submitted testimony, and they've done all that stuff. And presumably, that report would be like this thick with all of the testimony in it. No, seriously, it'll be like a really thick document. And oftentimes in the past, what you've seen is that's kind of a precursor to possibly reinstating what Robert mentioned earlier, the foundation budget review commission. The commission is made up by, 21 folks across, the Mass Taxpayers Foundation. There'll be MMA representatives. There'll be legislative representatives, the chairs of education. There'll be DESE representatives. There'll be Mass Association school superintendents, the school committees, a variety of folks are on that commission, and then they go through and look through that commission. What I'm hearing from Representative Roy is good news, which is it sounds like he's going to possibly be against forming that commission or bringing back that commission. If you do bring back that commission, then you start opening up. You might end up opening up Pandora's box. The other thing is, though, so I think this, what I said earlier, and I said it carefully, was this community has to be alert and awake and make sure we're working with Jeff and Becca and others to make sure that if this is an issue, you have to be aware that this could be detrimental. On the other hand, what Rob is also portraying is a very high portion of communities are in a hold harmless situation. The Regional School Committee Association, which we're not a part of, because we're not a regional school committee, is actually holding a public hearing tonight, protesting going after hold harmless, right? So actually there's now starting to form, I think, maybe some districts out there concerned about what the findings might be for the report, and I think you at least are seeing majority of districts that are hold harmless, where 20 years ago that was not the case. Hold harmless was supposed to be in some ways a temporary mechanism to protect districts with a deeply, heavily declining enrollment, namely at the time of Bedford and Gardner, where two of the districts really seeing declining enrollment, and it was a very circumstance. So it was there to safety net. But I think the dynamics, as Ross pointed out, over 20 years, you've got to the point where districts have now settled it. And now it's that minimum aid issue. And the last quick thing I'll say is, at the end of the day, most people are going to do it however a formula is looked at. And the state's been great with this, and the legislative delegation's been great with this, is you can't lose money. No one's voting for any formula change when the district loses money. It's a simple fact, and that's just the way it is. So that's actually a good thing. For us, but I also say town can't be complacent in this, and federal dynamics, world dynamics, geopolitical dynamics, economic dynamics. There's also an income tax question on the ballot this year to take the income tax from 5% to 4%. That's a $6 to $7 billion loss of the state budget. So at the end of the day, people are going to look back at some point and possibly look at Franklin and say, maybe do your job for a little while because your aggregate wealth shows you can afford to pay more money towards your local contribution. So there's a lot of dynamics here, and my message is simply we have to really pay very close attention to the income tax question this year, the DESE report, and other dynamics. And in previous years, I think the town's kind of slid this issue aside and not wanted to deal with it. And those days are now gone. We have to pay very close attention to this issue and work with Jeff and others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie, for bringing that up. I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I will continue to, fight to keep full harmless as part of any future program, because I know how vital it is to this community, and I would love to have unanimous support from the council, the school committee, and FinCom to push to keep that whole harmless in place. So thank you again for everybody for your hard work. I can't believe your meeting started at 6 o'clock, and it's already 8:45 p.m. But I can assure you I'm still at work here at the State House, and I'm not meeting anytime soon, because we've got one consolidated amendment. I expect at least another, and there's an hour for debate after each one. So I'll see you after midnight, Dr. Franklin. I'll be able to
See you for office hours tomorrow morning.
I'll see you at 8:30 tomorrow morning.
8:30. Okay. Is that it?
That's it, yeah. If there are no other questions, we're good. So thank you very much. Thanks for having us. Thanks for the great time.
They don't all clap that
Take a 2-minute recess.
We are now producing this in collaboration with Franklin TV and Franklin Public Radio. This podcast is my public service effort for Franklin, but we can't do it alone. We can always use your help. How can you help? If you can use the information that you find here, please tell your friends and neighbors. If you don't like something here, please let me know. Through this feedback loop, we can continue to make improvements. And I thank you for listening. For additional information, please visit franklinmatters.org. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me directly at suresteve@gmail.com. The music for the intro and exit was provided by Michael Clark and the group East of Shirley. The piece is titled Ernesto Mañana, copyright Michael Clark and Tin Type Tunes in 2008, and used with their permission. I hope you enjoy. By the way, you can also subscribe and listen to Franklin Matters Radio on your favorite podcast app. Search in podcasts for Franklin Matters.